So, all right, here we go. Hello and good evening, everybody. Today we're going to have a interesting discussion regarding the fallout between Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump in the White House. The ANC and the DA, which is South Africa rather, sent a delegation to the United States and they met President Trump. And I can't recall the last time that the South African-US exchange was covered this widely. And so it was quite interesting exchange, and notably what came up during the debate was the issue of, going to use inverted commas here, genocide in South Africa. So yeah, I'm joined today by Mark Oppenheimer, who is an advocate. He was also notably one of the people to question Julius Malema in court on the Shooter song. And I'm joined by Vuyo Zungalo, who is the president of the ATM party. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Vuyo, I think I'm going to start with you. Do you mind giving me your assessment of what you think transpired between Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa in the White House?
The exchanges were, you could see that there's two different priorities. The priority from President Trump was more on talking about issues concerning genocide because he had a certain narrative. Remember, the genesis of the entire visit was his statement that there's genocide, there's bad things happening in South Africa, and that then led to refugees coming, leaving South Africa, so-called refugees, leaving South Africa and going to the US. So that is where everything started. So that is why he had to keep on driving that particular narrative. That is why he even brought the videos, the photos, even though none of those are actually true. There's nothing in his presentation that is actually true. And then President Ramaphosa, in his side, the delegation of South Africa is more concerned about trade, that the issues of the strained relations between South Africa and the US is going to harm South Africa economically. So that is why you find that he brought his Minister of Trade and Industry, and more on his side, the language was more of trade. He did nothing substantive where he could have spoken out firmly to dispel any notion of genocide in South Africa. And from where we were sitting as a party, the issue of an accusation of genocide, you could easily clear that misinformation by bringing facts. Facts is how many South Africans are killed on a yearly basis. Last year, we can make just a comparison. Last year, that X number of South Africans were killed, and X of those numbers were white, X of those numbers were black, X of those numbers were actually in farm, or it was farm murders. That stat alone would be more than enough for anyone to say that there is no genocide. So we view that Mr. Ramaphosa missed an opportunity to really firmly dispel the notion, because even though he, in his opening statement, he said he's not going to repeat what he's been saying, but he's been saying to South Africans, and South Africans, it is maybe when he speaks in parliament or he speaks in government engagements, it is not the world media, because when the coverage yesterday, the entire world was watching as to what is happening. Therefore, any person, any leader, whether it's in Australia, it is Germany, it is New Zealand, they would ordinarily watch the press briefing yesterday instead of watching a parliament engagement where he's going to answer that. So we feel that he missed an opportunity using stats to dispel the notion.
All right, thank you for that. Mark, what's your response to that statement?
Yeah, I find it astounding to say that all of the claims in Donald Trump's presentations are misinformation. So I think we should be quite careful about using the word genocide. I think very few genocides have been committed in world history. The most prominent ones being in Rwanda and the Holocaust. Now, I imagine that many people who agree with me are going to be very happy to say that there's a genocide going on in Gaza, and they won't require much evidence for that at all, but very happy to sort of use the word. I think we shouldn't refer to what's happening in South Africa as a genocide. But I think what we can do is acknowledge that there is a serious problem with farm murders. And I don't think we should just say that it's ordinary crime. And so I take the invitation to look at the numbers. So, for example, the general murder rate in South Africa is 33 out of 100,000. So for every 100,000 South Africans, 33 of them will be murdered. Now, there's a distortion in that about 5 of the people who are murdered will be murdered through intruder attacks. The others will be killed through domestic violence, social fabric crimes, gangsterism. Farm murders are by definition all intruder attacks. And the farmer murder rate, so if we take the roughly 33,000 commercial farmers around, that murder rate is 100 out of 100,000. So that's 20 times higher. Now that's alarming. So the numbers are a concern, and the other one is the nature of the killings. So, and Donald Trump brought a stack of articles that talk about people being killed and being tortured. As you know, I ran the Kill the Boer trial, and we spent a lot of time researching this sort of aspect of it. And I must say they're incredibly shocking to hear what people go through. You have old ladies who have drills pushed through their knees. People have swords thrust down their necks. There was a terrible case of a mother and a daughter who were murdered with broken bottles, and Kill the Boer was written in blood above their dead bodies. And it was unclear to the police whether they'd also been raped because of the nature of the brutality. So we really shouldn't be downplaying this. And I will say, to the South African delegation's credit, they accept that there's brutality on farms. So you had Retief Goosen talking in particular about how his own family had been attacked, how his father's friends who are farmers had been murdered, how they live in fear and they're surrounded by electric fencing. That seemed to be something that was sort of accepted on a number of occasions. John Steenhuisen said we should make it a priority crime. By the way, this has sort of been the rallying cry for decades to say, it's not that the only crime in South Africa is farm murders, but it is a serious crime, and it's different to other crimes because you have people living in rural areas who are quite far spread. There seems to be a racialized element in some of the attacks. The claim that it's all robbery just isn't borne out by the facts. Often what you have is, people are murdered, tortured, very little is taken, or a car will be taken and then abandoned close by to the house. So there's other factors here, and you need a specialized method for dealing with that kind of crime, like we do for copper cable theft and like we do for rhino poaching. So I think we must also recognize that the nature of Donald Trump is that he is fast and loose with detail, but that he's aiming in the right direction on this. So he described that memorial with 1,000 crosses as a gravesite. That's inaccurate. But he also says each one of those crosses represents a murdered farmer, and that is totally accurate. Actually, if we go and look back to, I think, 1990 to date, we have 6,000 farmers who are murdered. Those crosses there were between 500 and 1,000. So it's actually a minimal depiction of the number of people who've been murdered. There's another famous monument of a valley that's filled with white crosses. That's, I think, just under 3,000 representing people that have been murdered. So we shouldn't make light of this. Now, there is a sense in which I've said we shouldn't call what's happening a genocide. But there's a famous system used to sort of work out when you're on the road to genocide. Genocide is not just an on-off switch. They talk about the 10 different stages of genocide. And the Genocide Watch website, which monitors all countries, puts South Africa quite worryingly far up that list. So some of the stages that I mentioned are, firstly, when you have a classification system, which we dismantled after apartheid, where we said we're no longer going to think about each other in terms of our races. We're going to embrace non-racialism. And that brief period of non-racism has been utterly abandoned. We now very much refer to people, by their race. We have a series of discriminatory laws that are on the basis of race. People like Afrikaners are dehumanized. They were called cowards for fleeing the country. You have Julius Malema, running a pretty big political party, calling for white people to be murdered, for Afrikaners to be slaughtered, to make light of a lot of the sort of murders. So all of those things put us towards the genocide project. And so it's important to be able to push back against that, push back against the polarization. The final 2 steps of the genocide are, number 9 is extermination and number 10 is denial. And we have microdoses of that where people are being exterminated in these terrible ways, and we are denying it. But we don't have the mass scale of a genocide.
Right,
but we
so-
definitely have very worrying murders.
So I just want to taste just a few facts for both of you, but first, just to get you, Mark, you mentioned some numbers. So you say it's about 6,000 since 1990, right. So if you look at Srebrenica, which is done by Slobodan Milosevic, it was 12,000 people during one-off event. Okay, that's not really the same distribution. Gaza, at the moment, the number's thrown around 60,000, and I'm not using genocide because it's disputed. Okay, it's but fine, that's being thrown around at the moment. Even Rwanda, if you read critical literature on it, notably by Edward Herman, that I know quite well, was very skeptical of using the word at the time because he said that it was also to some extent a civil war, not denying the number of killings, just the interpretation. Holocaust, I don't think anyone outside of the insanity land denies that one. And Armenian genocide, Namibian Holocaust, it's 1/4 of the population. My threshold for genocide in terms of broad numbers, I mean, I would agree with the critics, it just doesn't cover what is in South Africa. In terms of brutality, and I'm going to throw this question at you. Do you accept at least that in terms of the brutality, Mark said, I think it's 100 farmers being killed per day, or per 100,000, with a general population of 33,000. So they 3 times as high risk as being killed as the general population. And do you accept at least that in terms of the brutality, there's something to be concerned here? Whatever notion or word we throw around for it, surely genocide is wrong. But is there something about farm murders that you're concerned about?
Just one quick interjection. So my claim is not that there are 100 farm murders a day. It's that the murder rate is 100 out of 100,000.
Compared to 30 out of 100,000 for general population.
Yes. But so the number of farmers that are murdered in a year is different.
Yeah, but the farmers are 3 times at a 3 times higher rate than the general population. Take 100
yes,
divided by
and 20 times higher on intruder attacks.
Okay,
So that's the real
were you with those statistics in mind, the numbers now being thrown? I mean, first of all, did you accept there is a problem with farmers being killed in South Africa?
There's a problem with there's a criminality and murder problem in our country. That is a reality. Now, it happens in the townships, in the villages, it happens in Cape Flats. That is why even Johan Rupert spoke about it yesterday. So even in the farms, it happens. And when it happens in the farms, it happens to both black and white people. So for me, what I think the message I need to get across here is that the general crime problem, we need to solve it as a criminal problem, as a criminality problem, not as a problem that we make an inference that it is only applicable to a certain race, or it is a race-based attack. Because once we say it's a race-based attack, then it means we are not solving a crime problem. We are racializing a problem of crime. Because if we're to go to the townships, majority of the people that live in the townships are black people. Therefore, if you go to any township and you find that out of 100,000 people that are living there, or maybe if there's 100 murders that are recorded in a certain township, 100 of those murders are black people. That is because majority of the people in that particular area are black people. Similarly, when you go to some of the villages, it's going to be the same thing, where if people are killed in a village, and majority of the people in the village are black people, it's going to be, when we're talking about it, we need to talk about it from a perspective of crime. Now, if we go to an area, let's say it is a farm, and in a farm, majority will be white people. So when majority of people who are in the farms who happen to be white are killed, it is not different from when it happens in the township where it's black people, or in the villages where it's black people, because the majority of the people in these different localities is, for example, if we can make an example to say there is genocide against colored people, and when we probe further, someone says at the Cape Flats, for example, 100 people are killed on a daily basis. That would not justify the inference that we are referring there's a genocide or it is a racial attack against colored people, because in Cape Flats, majority of the people are colored. If there was any activity that seeks to kill a person just by the color of the skin, would be having a different conversation.
Sure. I would really grant you that there's a lot of crime in South Africa, and I would bet that if you were to measure gang crime, for example, crimes in certain localities, you might come up to the same rates as the farmers being killed. But I don't think anybody is in denial of that. What I would like to ask you to expand on is, I mean, the farm murders in South Africa doesn't just take place in a vacuum. It takes place within a political context, which is a historical context that we're all very familiar with. There's the land debate, redistribution debate is part of this whole thing. And then second one, it has to be mentioned, which Donald Trump showed there, was Julius Malema. This is the third largest political party making the statements against a minority community and doing it for political opportunism. Okay, so Donald Trump threw all of that also at government. So I'd just like you to respond to that. What is your interpretation of that?
We get okay, firstly, I think we just need to reiterate that with the transition from apartheid to democracy, some of the issues that are problematic, whether it is the economy, it is land, it is many issues, they have not been thoroughly addressed. Hence, there's widening inequalities in our country between black and white people. Therefore, there's going to be that frustration from the side of the poor, the side of the people who feel they do not have, they are living in squalor in their own country. So that is the first issue. And then the second issue that perhaps we need to get across here is that once we talk about farm murders, we need to appreciate that there are also incidents whereby a farmer will abuse or mistreat a farm worker, and then the farm worker, predominantly farm workers who are not South African citizens. And again, I want to refer to what Johan Rupert stated yesterday when he linked the question of criminality and illegal immigration. Now, once these people are ill-treated, the only recourse they have, it is criminality, it is murder, it is all of these things, because in their view, they cannot go to the police, because once they go to the police, they are going to be arrested for being illegal in the country. So the mistreatment of black workers by their white farmers or white managers.
I think I'm not sure, I've lost the video a little bit there towards the end.
I wouldn't mind interjecting at this juncture, just to sort of.
Yeah, just quickly second. I just lost your last 10 seconds, but I think we got the gist you're saying. So just quickly, Chris Wyatt joined us at the moment. Welcome, Chris. I'll let you join the conversation now. We're having a discussion mainly between Mark and Vuyo, and I'm just hosting. Mark, just your response to that. It was quite a mouthful being said.
Yeah, a couple of things. So the one is, I think it's important to actually be guided by the numbers. And I think there's some pandering that went on with Rupert sort of blaming illegal aliens for farm attacks. If you go and look at the numbers and you go and look at the people that have been arrested or convicted for farm attacks, South Africans are the vast majority. There are people from other countries who have been convicted of those crimes, but it's mainly South Africans. It's true that sometimes these murders are a result of labor disputes, but it's actually a very small number of those reasons. So there's a big study that was done which looks at the basis for what these attacks are. Sometimes there's multiple reasons. So sometimes, as I say, there's an element of race crime in it. In other words, it is directly because of the person's race. I mean, when you write "kill the boy in blood" over a person's body, that's not just ordinary crime. That's motivated by hate. And Hugo is right to point out that you're dealing with a context that is unlike any of the other crimes in South Africa. So we recognize that we have a serious problem with gender-based violence in South Africa, but there is no political party that chants "kill a woman." Everybody recognizes that to do so would be an absolutely dreadful thing. Now, most people that are killed in South Africa are not women. I think only 16% of murder victims are female. but we recognize that it's a serious problem, and we would find it absolutely abhorrent if some political party started chanting, kill the woman. So this sort of move of saying, well, it is only simply criminality, when we wouldn't do that for any other group, strikes me as a racist denial of a serious problem. It's not the claim that all crimes are driven by racial hatred, but some of them are. I would imagine if there were politicians saying, kill the coloreds, and then people were acting on that and killing people because they were colored, that's very different from there just being high murder rates in the colored community. So you've got to look at the particular facts of the case, and in a lot of the facts of the farm murder cases, there is a racial motivation. When you have Julius Malema, by the way, sits on the Judicial Services Commission, gets to pick our judges, chanting in stadiums with 90,000 people, shoot to kill the Boer, kill the farmer. And when I was cross-examining him, says, when I hear farmer, I think of a white person. That is evidence that must be taken into account. Mr. Malema did the same move that Rio is making, which is to say it's just criminality. Can you imagine if someone said that during apartheid? If you had white racists torturing innocent black people because they were black, and we just said it's just criminality. Why is anybody, paying attention? The numbers are actually quite low. I mean, the number of people that were killed by apartheid operatives, numbers in the thousands, but not the tens of thousands. So you could have had a movement, well, South Africa's a violent place, but we don't take that view. We think it was really sinister, really evil. The people who did that stuff should be punished, and we should denounce it as racial hatred. And we should do the same when it comes to farm murders.
So I'd like to have Chris Wire joining here. Chris, for those who don't know him, stays in Pennsylvania. He's American, but I think he's fallen in love with South Africa because he's told me more about the country than I know sometimes. But Chris, Donald Trump, Cyril Ramaphosa, just to quickly grab that, the event, the topic of farm murders came up, white genocide. Let's use that in quote, in inverted commas at the moment. What is your perspective of this as an American, and how do you interpret your president's reaction?
Well, first off, the media is lying across the board in South Africa, United States. Trump never said white genocide in that meeting yesterday, not once. Now, he did mention that in a post recently, but he's only done that for just recently. He didn't say it in the post. And when he was asked the question directly, he said, I'm not convinced that it is a genocide. That's actually what happened. But every media outlet, the fake Cockprot 24 and all the others in South Africa, are running around and saying that he said there was a white genocide and that Ramaphosa refuted it. He never made that claim. He did talk about farm murders, but it's not about farm murders. This is a red herring. It's a red herring. It's not about land. It's not about farm. It's about racial discrimination. That's what this is about. That's what Trump's upset about. That's what the Americans have been upset about, plus all the things that the South African government have done to rubbish our national interest. And I can run through a list of those things. It's a very long list, not necessary. But I do want to push back against Mr. Zungula, a couple of comments he made very quickly. And I don't mean to be unfair because it'll sound like Mark and I are ganging up on him. But I mean, I do need to push back against a couple things, and I appreciate him being here. Number one, blaming illegal aliens for farm murders, I think, is inappropriate because very few of those are actually being committed by illegal aliens. And there's a lot more criminality going on in Zamazamas and illegal mining with illegal aliens than there is on farms. Many illegal aliens work on farms and work there, and they get paid, and we don't have this sort of attack. Most of these murders are being committed by South Africans. We know this factually, as Mark alluded to. And the second thing is the issue of the land not being addressed. I think Mr. Zungula is partially correct in that, but also not entirely accurate. First off, the window that was open was from 1995 to 1999 for land claims. Anybody who had their land taken from them from the formation of South Africa under the Union of South Africa Act in 1910 through the Native Lands Act of 1913, all the way up until the end of apartheid, could apply for land restitution. There were 75,000 claims that were filed. Now, we can make an argument about whether this restitution was fair, but almost all of those people took cash instead of land. Now, whether it was a fair dissolution of, this amount of money was fair, that's a legitimate argument to have. But to make the argument that the land issue has never been addressed is illegitimate. Also, Zuma opened up an illegitimate second window, which another 141,000 land claims were filed. Most of them were duplicative, many of them making claims against land previously settled. Also, the government has acquired over 4 million hectares of land under the willing buyer, willing reseller program using Section 25 of the Constitution when necessary. And they have bought land, but they don't provide extension services. They don't provide credit. They don't provide grants. They don't provide farm equipment. They don't provide any expertise. They've ignored the aspiring farmers. And finally, this isn't about farms. This lie about South African whites owning 72% of land, it's just plain red herring. People simply need to read the 2017 land audit, which is the most recent data available. And in that land audit, there are 123 million hectares of land on the surface area of South Africa. Of that, 93 million were privately held. The rest were held by the government, making the second largest landowner. The 93 million hectares of land, of that, 36 million by the government were classified as agricultural. Of that 36 million, so-called whites owned 72% of the agricultural land, or 26 million hectares, which represents just under 29% of the total private land and just 21% of the surface area of South Africa. So 8% of the population 8 years ago owned 21% of the land, not 72%. This is a red herring. This is something the ANC has screwed up. There are people who want to be farmers, but putting 1 million Black South Africans into subsistence farming is not a recipe for success. It's a recipe for perpetual poverty. Most Black South Africans that I know, and I know a lot, want to own their home. They want to own the land around them. They don't want to be farmers. So this is, Mr. Zungula is, I believe, partially correct that the land issue hasn't been addressed because the ANC hasn't taken it seriously and addressed the credit and the training and things like that. I'll stop there.
So I would like to give you the opportunity to respond to both of them. Particularly the question of land. I suppose this conversation always goes to land. Is this relevant, and is it relevant to the Trump Ramaphosa exchange? I think you're muted.
Yeah, it's definitely relevant. Not only the question of the land issue, but also the question of the economic participation of South Africans. So there's a myriad of issues that affect, the racial tensions between Black and white South Africans. And chief amongst them, it is how in the economic structure, white South Africans are much more better en masse as compared to Black South Africans. And amongst those, one of those reasons is that once you're going to have a country where also inequality is as wide as South Africa, and this inequality, it is racial. If it were talking about another country whereby the inequality, it is ethnic in nature, obviously there was going to be some tensions between the two, because one ethnic group was going to say, but this other group has been favored. You will study the case of Rwanda as an example. But in this case, it is coming because of the race issue and the fact that the history of South Africa, especially there was colonization and there was apartheid. And majority of the Black people feel that since the new dispensation, not much has been done to correctly address those underlying factors and the wrongs of the past in terms of the participation of South African citizens. And we've got different experiences as a people. Once we are going to be talking about our own personal experiences, that I know a few people and they don't want to be farmers, it is not something that is it is widespread, whereby we can say it is. We can speak it as fact. Yes, you can engage one or two people. They'll have different preferences as to what they want to do. But at a broader scale, when we're speaking about Black South Africans, the issue is that the racial system in our country has not been addressed, and their frustrations has led to this high crime or high criminality problem, which will affect everyone. And I want to go back to the statements, the chant of Julius Malema. It is also been proven in court. There's a court ruling that is saying that there is no hate speech in that, because it is a chant that has been used in political gatherings. And that court judgment did not say that based on the chants of Julius Malema, there's been spikes in the killings of white people. So I think what we need to deal with here, it is how the political speak of majority or of people in their respective communities. For example, I know one party that has got a chant or a slogan that says "one settler, one bullet." Now, but we don't see people actively leaving that particular rally of a party, going to white people and actively shooting them or giving them one bullet. There's no such thing. So I think what we are doing, or what maybe the world media or some of the analysts are doing, it is to not to understand the racial tensions of South Africa that are caused by the apartheid past and the injustices that have not been corrected, and the fact that the economy has not been structured in a manner that would satisfy everyone. And when it comes now to the criminality, like I stated earlier, all forms of murders are morally wrong, and we should always, at all times, condemn each and every one of those murders. But where the problem is to elevate the murder of a certain group of people as if their lives are much more valuable than the other lives of Black people. I think that is where the problem is, because, like I stated earlier, if you go to the Cape Flats and you are going to find that there's more colored people dying there, it should concern everyone. The issue of colored of people dying at the Cape Flats should concern us. The issue of people dying in or being killed or murdered in the villages, in the rural areas, should concern us. The people dying in the rural areas whereby there's farms, all murders in South Africa should be of concern.
So, Mark, I'd like you to respond to that, and particularly, I guess I would like to get to the issue of racial discrimination and racial inequalities, and we can even add to that packet legacies of apartheid. I mean, to what extent? I mean, maybe just elaborate on it. Surely those things do play a role.
Yeah, let me say a couple of things. So the one is our hate speech law, and I've run most of the reported judgments on hate speech, does not require a causal link between the speech and real world violence. So the Constitutional Court in the matter of Kwalani made it very clear that you don't need to show that the speech led to a real world harm. In that particular case, Kwalani had written a homophobic article where he said, I pray that politicians would have the balls to change those parts of the Constitution that allow a man to marry a man and ditto a woman. That was found to be hate speech. Some of the evidence that was led in the trial was that Black lesbian women living in townships felt more vulnerable because you had a background condition of violence. They accepted that there was no evidence at all that anyone who read the article then went out and correctively raped a Black lesbian woman or harmed a Black lesbian woman anyway, but they said the context exists. In the Kill the Boer case, the judge dismissed all of the evidence that was very similar to the Kwalani evidence on the basis that no causal link could be shown. The Supreme Court of Appeal recognized that that is not a part of our law and disagreed with that. I would be very interested to hear what Vuyo thinks the chant means and what he thinks the court found it means. Because what the court said was that the chant is actually directed at the ANC government for its failures in land reform. Now, I found this a sort of baffling conclusion for it to reach, given that this wasn't argued by the EFF. A poll was done recently asking South Africans and representative samples of different political parties, different races, what they thought it meant. And that answer came stone last. A lot of people saw it as, what it says on paper. In the course of the trial, when I was cross-examining Mr. Malema, he said a number of things that make me think that he means it in a very literal sense. So I asked him, would you pledge that you will never call for the slaughter of white people? He refused. He said that killing is justified in a revolution and that we are in a revolution. That he's not afraid of killing, he's not afraid of dying, that when the time is right, he will bomb the union buildings. All of these things give us evidence to the fact that the words are meant to be understood literally. When I asked him, what are farmers? He says it's a white person. So the idea that actually Boer, who knows what a Boer is nowadays, it's so nebulous, absolutely false. So I think relying on those judgments isn't taking the matter much further. And the fact of the matter is, when other countries go and look at, Malema singing in these stadiums, they're absolutely horrified. America has very strong free speech provisions, and the response from the Oval Office was, why isn't this person in jail? And of course, it's a concern that Mr. Malema is the person who picks judges. And so judges may feel that if they want to get elevated, if you want to be promoted from a High Court judge to Supreme Court of Appeal judge, you will be questioned by Mr. Malema. And he has not held back when judges have found against him. So there's a case of a judge who held him liable for defamation, and then applied for an elevation to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Mr. Lema said to him, "Why should I grant you a promotion after what you did to me?" So that sends a certain chill. On land issues, I mean, Chris is right to say we need to recognize what's actually been done. We had a land claims process. 95% of the land claims were resolved. Most people, when given the choice between land and money, chose money. So the sort of idea that there's a hunger for land just isn't true. It's not borne out by the data. When you poll South Africans about the most burning issues, racism and land reform come out right at the bottom, and the thing that comes up at the top, crime, unemployment, and education. The one thing that Cyril said in the White House is that there is a concern with a poor economic situation, and that's going to breed crime. Doesn't necessarily have to. I mean, India has had periods of like huge poverty without having the concomitant levels of crime. So there's obviously other factors that play a role in that. But one of the reasons why we have a terrible economic situation, one of the world's highest levels of unemployment, is our terrible economic policies. We've made it very difficult for businesses to start. We have lots of race-based rules, as Hugo alluded to. There's racial discrimination that's caked into our law. One of the reasons why we've denied poor Black people who live in rural areas access to Starlink is because Elon Musk says, I refuse to have 30% of my company owned by people that aren't me. That's an extortion. And the fact that I'm not Black is why I'm not able to run Starlink in your country. And it seems like there'll be some sort of shift on that basis. I mean, if you look at the things that the Trump regime wants, Chris is right to point out that, ending farm murders is one of them, race discriminatory policies are the other. And the other one, of course, is our terrible policy regarding Israel, that we're attacking, America's greatest ally in the Middle East, spitting in its face by wanting to change the consulate in Sandton to Leila Khaled Drive, naming it after a known Palestinian terrorist, and then saying we want to do that specifically so the Americans have to have that on their letterhead. Of course, the response will be to just close down the consulate. So, I'm hoping that this meeting leads to a wake up in our policy.
So Chris, I'd like you as an American to sort of respond a bit to what Mark said, if that is the position of the US government. And, let's also bring up Israel into this. South Africa did take Israel to the International Court of International Criminal, no, ICJ, International Court of Justice, right? Anyways, the alleged allegation is genocide. This is a view that is held commonly in global South countries. It is not commonly held in Europe and North America. There's a lot more sympathy, I believe, for Israel, especially in the United States, as I understand your politic. I mean, and a lot of commentators were saying, well, the reason Trump brought this up was simply to humiliate Ramaphosa and to say, well, if you're saying we're doing genocide, you're doing genocide as well. How do you respond to that?
I don't think it's germane to the conversation. First off, South Africa's case against Israel for Gaza is illegitimate. It doesn't meet the definition of genocide internationally recognized by the national community and conventions. And I'm not an attorney, but I see Mark shaking his head because I'm correct on that. And beyond that, it's hypocritical in the highest order. Where was the ANC in South Africa when the Gambia took the unique novel approach to take another country to the court for genocide over the Rohingya in Myanmar in 2019? They didn't participate. They didn't even file an amicus brief as a friend of the court. They sat around and said nothing about it. Where was the ANC when the Ethiopian army executed Tigrayan conscripts in crimes against humanity in their conflict just occurred? Where was the ANC over what's happening in the Sahel? Where is the ANC over what happened in Darfur in a clear genocidal campaign that took place there by the Janjaweed? They're nowhere. They said nothing. Where was the ANC in Rwanda? To be fair, that was beginning 94, so there wasn't much they could do. But where was the ANC in Bosnia-Herzegovina when Bosniak Muslims were slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands by Serbs? They're nowhere. They're hypocrites. There's no basis whatsoever to their claim. This is not a legitimate case. And so that's not a pro-Israel position. That's a pro-morality and justice position. But I would like to respond to a couple other things, Hugo, if you allow me, or if I've answered your question adequately. Can I go?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. So how quickly forget the 2003 court decision South Africa declared kill the Boer speech hate speech. How quickly have we forgotten about that? So now it's suddenly okay to sing that song when it was illegal in 2003. And inequality is not simply a consequence of colonialism or apartheid in South Africa, but of rather 30 years of corruption, theft, rent-seeking, and race-based legislation by the ANC. They have taken a situation and made it demonstrably worse. There are only a few millions of Black South Africans living in abject poverty under apartheid. That doesn't make apartheid just or moral. But today, there are 30 million Black South Africans living in abject poverty in South Africa, 3 times as many. Now, South Africa does have a very high Gini coefficient, but so does Botswana. Botswana's minorities are not racially targeted or discriminated against. They do quite well in Botswana, and they're accepted. Ke Motswana, if I'm a white person, actually their population is actually about the same or higher, 8% white, and they're not discriminated against. Neither are the only people discriminated against there in a major fashion are the Bushmen, but that's a whole other story. And that doesn't have anything to do with skin. It has to do with people who want their territory in the Central Kalahari. Now, Mr. Zungula said the racial system has not been addressed since the end of apartheid. I would disagree with that. The apartheid system and its racist laws were largely dismantled prior to 1994. There are no past laws. There's no anti-miscegenation laws saying that people can't mix and have kids. Otherwise, Siya Kolisi would be in a lot of trouble. I mean, most of that legislation has been removed. I believe what he was getting at, to be fair to him, is he was talking about the economic dispensation. And if that's his point, I understand where he's coming from, and there's some validity to what he was saying. But apartheid was removed before the end of 94, before 94. And poverty is not the proximate cause of crime. If it were, the world would be on fire. 4 billion people around this planet lived in poverty, many in abject poverty. I lived in poverty growing up, and I'll admit that poverty in Appalachia is not the same as Bangladesh or living in Alexandria or living in the homeland, or not homeless, but in the rural areas of KZN. But I went without water. We fetched from a cistern. I didn't have plumbing. I used an outhouse, or a privy, as you guys call it, and didn't have the money. We ate what we farmed, that sort of thing, to survive. I never stole from anybody. Poverty doesn't cause crime. Crime is caused by moral decay and other issues. It's not caused by poverty. That's not true. Poor people don't steal. Poor people don't execute people. People don't commit assassinations. People who steal have things because they've stolen, and they steal again. That's not caused by poverty. That's caused by greed. Desperate people who are starving, yes, they'll commit crime to steal food. But by and large, poor people don't steal. So as far as the issue about basically what Vuyo is saying is that all lives matter, I agree, buddy. I agree. Cape Flats, I go to the Cape Flats. I've been to Khayelitsha. I was there during the elections at 5 polling stations. I'm one of the few independent journalists actually talks about Black people being murdered in South Africa and the horrible crimes happening to them, and to coloreds and to Indians. I don't just focus on white South Africans. Black deaths all do matter. And I'm one of the few journalists consistently covers that. He's 100% correct. But you cannot use whataboutism to dismiss the torture and murder of those in rural South Africa. I've talked about the Black cattle farmer in the Free State who was shot in the head at his butchery and then went in a coma for months, came home, died a month later. I've talked about the Indian mother, 4 months old, or 4 months pregnant, and her throat was slit from ear to ear because she was on a farm. And I talk about Edward Neumeister, murdered at his Austrian restaurant during COVID, and of course, Brendan Horner, and about everyone. And also Sifatso Pule, 9 months pregnant, not on a farm, but murdered by her lover, murder for hire, because she was inconveniently pregnant with a child, a beautiful woman. And of course, UCT student who was murdered by the postal worker. All those lives matter. And I talk about all of them. It's the media, Vuyo, that talks about this and pushes this narrative that some lives are more important than others. Not the minorities, it's the media. So that was my soapbox. You go ahead and get that in.
That's quite a mouthful. Vuyo, I'd like you to respond to that. But I think just from your perspective, also maybe speak a little bit to the Israel case, because I think that's important international relations. I sort of disagree a bit with Chris on that one. And then the other point I'd like to make is the point about poverty, to say that, there are other countries and other places in the world where there is a lot of poverty, also a lot of inequality, and certainly they don't have the same murder and crime rate as South Africa. So, how do you speak to those 2 points?
Yeah, no, on the Israel case, if you take someone to court for what you believe that they are doing is wrong, surely there should be any neutral observer that wants to get rid of any wrongdoing cannot fight you for taking someone to court. Instead, they would be happy because even the person that has been accused, once they are in court, then they have an opportunity to prove and to show that they are not doing anything wrong. Now, to make a view to say that the reason why America now is basically targeting South Africa, it is because of the perception that South Africa is fighting against Israel. I think that is, one of the most disappointing, statements one would make, because it shows that we don't have the kind of leadership that says wrong is wrong. Rather, we see a leadership that says wrong is only wrong when it's done by other people. So that speaks to double standards. So I would not speak on behalf of the ANC to say, why did they not act in the other countries? Because there's so much wrong that is happening in the world. So I don't think the ANC would have capacity to be the world's policeman, where they go to court to the ICJ for all of the wrongs that are happening in the world. But we do want to encourage and support the ANC, whereby on the issue of Palestine, which even the great President Mandela, even when he was alive, when he first became president, it was something that he actually stood firm on. When he said that when he was challenged on the friendship with Palestine, and he made it very clear that there should be no person that should dictate to him or dictate to South Africa as to who South Africa can be friends with, and so forth. So in our view, if there's no wrongdoing in Israel, there should be no attack on South Africa by taking Israel to court, because Israel should bring their form of evidence to show that there is no genocide happening there. The facts, the facts will be laid open for everyone to see whether is Israel in the wrong or is Palestine in the wrong. Then the last issue on the issue of crime and criminality in South Africa, one would appreciate that one of the actions that were taken by the apartheid government was to forcefully remove people from many areas, and they put them in tight lands and in small pieces of land, just like Soweto and the other areas. Now, once you box many people in a very, very small space or pieces of land, and you deprive them of economic participation or economic means of making a living, and you add poverty at that, and you add some of the other issues, whether it is drugs, it is alcohol, the mix of all of these factors is going to create a problem of criminality. Now, this criminality, as we say, it affects everyone. That is why even the politicians in our country, they will drive with bodyguards. Even the church leaders are going to drive with bodyguards. Even in church, you are going to have black church leaders being robbed at the pulpit. That is the nature of South Africa. So that is why you are saying that the combination of all of these factors has led South Africa to be this problematic, to have this problem of criminality, which when you want to address it, we need to take into cognizance the impact and the legacy of apartheid, and also the failures of the current government. Because when you speak about the failures of the current government, it is not to say, when we speak about the legacy of apartheid, it is not to say that the current government, it is perfect, the manner in which they've been handling the crime issue in our country is perfect. Yes, let us recognize the legacy of apartheid and also deal with the inefficiencies of the current government of the day when it comes to resolving the crime issue. And countries are different, and also the socialization of the people in the different countries, it is different. You can go to Japan, leave your phone there because of the socialization of the people in Japan. If you leave your phone in a restaurant, they are not going to take it. But if you go to Nigeria, it's going to be a different story. If you come to South Africa, it is going to be a different story. So we need to understand the context of South Africa in the colonial and the apartheid and the failures of the current government from the past 30 years or so.
So, Mark, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to that, and I suppose also want to give you an opportunity to respond to the Israeli story. How do you see that influencing this event?
Yeah, so on Israel, I mean, Rio has a strange understanding of what it is to do someone a favor. The next time I want to give him a birthday present, I'll falsely accuse him of murder and give him the opportunity to tell everyone why he's innocent. And I'm sure he'll just absolutely love the experience of being dragged through the courts and being, called someone accused of murder. It's especially distasteful after Israel endured October 7th, the greatest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, where 1,200 people were murdered, where women were brutally raped, where children were kidnapped, to then accuse the Israeli state engaging in a defensive war to try and rescue its hostages of genocide is particularly disgraceful. It's pretty obvious that the ANC weren't doing this out of moral valor. As Chris points out, there were many occasions when the ANC could have said something and didn't. So why did they say something about Israel? Well, it seems that they were bankrupt before the elections, that they were being sued by a company who had printed posters for them, that they were, I think it was about 100 million rand in debt. And then quite magically, after launching this litigation, the ANC weren't in debt anymore. Now, I'm not saying that the funders paid for the litigation, because the South African taxpayer paid for the litigation. What I think happened is that the ANC got bailed out. I think it's reasonable to believe that, given that Naledi Pandor met up with Hamas and had a phone call with Iran, that the money comes through those channels, that MTN is based in Iran. Hugo might have stronger views on this than I do. But it seems illicit and not done for any good purpose. Also, the sort of kind of claims of genocide, we need to know what genocide entails. And it requires dolus specialis. So in other words, you have the intent to wipe out a people in whole or in part because of who they are. That's very different to engaging in a war where the civilian versus combatant casualty rate is actually pretty low in comparison to wars that have been waged in urban conflict zones. So Hugo made mention of around 60,000 people being killed. Of course, you've got to differentiate between Hamas operatives who are deserving of death and innocent civilians who are not. But of course, when you have a situation when Hamas uses civilians as human shields, the moral liability for their deaths lands at the feet of Hamas, not at the hands of the IDF.
Right, Mark, I just want to challenge you on a few facts there. First of all, on Iran, sorry, but the evidence for it was spread on South African media by people tied, as far as I could tell, to Israeli think tanks. I've looked at it, and I speak a bit of Farsi as well because my wife's from there. And believe me, I make no excuse for the Iranian government. I would like for them to be gone, but I just haven't seen any credible evidence to that side. So if it pops up, sure, but it just doesn't look credible to me. Also, just to say, the ANC has had long empathy for the Palestinians. Whatever we think of it, they have called Israel, they've accused Israel of apartheid on numerous occasions, going back all the way to Nelson Mandela. Okay, so they do have strong feelings on that issue. In the GNU government, they refused to share the foreign affairs portfolio, and that portfolio, it must be said, was staffed with a lot of South African Muslims. Notably, Naledi Pandor was a converted Muslim. And the advice that the ANC government took was on the advice of South African lawyers and also inspired by Dr. Francis Boyle in the United States, who notably defended, was involved in the Bosnian case, accusing Slobodan Milosevic of genocide. So there was a little bit more nuance to the story. Now, fine, Israel has their chance to defend themselves in this say, but just going on some of the facts on that story. Currently, something like half of Gaza's homes have been flattened. The UN and the Medicine Sans Frontières and a few groups are warning of famine breaking out. Now, fine, okay, I'm not using the genocide label as a quite of a bit stick to a Jewish community. I understand it from a Jewish community, but there was something to this, the ANC. They were not alone in their convictions on this. That was shared with many countries who feel strongly about the Palestinians. Aren't we just brushing it off? Because the way I have seen it, there's also been that, look, this was an international affairs issue. Now, I happen to be an Afrikaner, I care about the farm issues. But, I was watching this and I was saying, well, when the ANC went into it, I had a personal conversation with Gweri Montashi. And I said, are you guys aware of what's going to happen? The United States will react to this. And he looked at me like I am confused. Didn't want to know what was going on. They did not want to hear that the United States will geopolitically react if we accuse Israel because of the strong affiliation that America had with Israel on this. So, I mean, just to get your response into that.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So, in law, you have different kinds of evidence. And so often it's the case that you don't have a smoking gun, but we have a thing called abductive reasoning, which is reasoning from the best inference. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that Chris is standing in front of a dead woman, that he is covered in blood, that he smells of gunpowder, but we search his house high and low and we can't find the smoking gun. I think it's fair to say, look, in all likelihood, there's a bullet in this woman's head. Chris is, covered in blood. Maybe he shot her in the head and disposed of the weapon. So I think there are many reasons why the ANC ganged up on Israel. I think some of it has to do with anti-Semitic hatred. It has to do with falsely accusing Israel of being an apartheid state. And I think some of it has to do with financial expedience. And I think we still have to sort of answer what happened to the ANC's 100 million rands worth of debt. That disappeared. So my bet is that they received some compensation for it. We don't have the checks, but I think it's a fair sort of abductive reasoning exercise to say, look, it's highly unlikely that it was just sort of forgiven, given the timing of it and given all the other meetings. But you're right to say that there was other animus there, and that's part of the problem.
Okay, so I just want to cut you because we're running out of time. When it closes at 9 o'clock, because people have to go. Do you mind giving me a 1 minute last thought, and then Chris, you do the same, and then Vuyo, you do the same, and then I think we end it there.
Oh, is it on me now? Okay, I'll do it quickly.
Okay, progress.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not one of those people that's affiliated with an Israeli group, and I believe the first analyst that actually made this connection between the potential after 9/11 Pandor went to Tehran, and then suddenly 102 million rand was paid off on the debt, and the 49 million in interest was forgiven. Plus, they spent 20 million on their 112th birthday celebration in Nelspruit in Bela Stadium, and then they funded a political campaign for which we have yet to see any disclosure at the Independent Elections Commission for anything. All we have are donations from the Batho Trust and the Chancellor House. There's nothing indicating where at least 200 million rand have come from. So the reason that comes behind that, there's a little more to it than I only have a minute to explain it. There's a lot more to the analysis than simply making the allegation. It seems reasonable that the ANC has failed to disclose their funding, and why have they done that? So it's not unreasonable. Anyway, yeah, so I want to thank you for inviting me to come on the panel. I apologize for coming late, but I was trying to cover Tammy Bruce in the White House, the State Department. She never did come on. She finally came on after I went off. And I thank you, Vuyo, for being here. I appreciate the chance to chat with you guys, and thank you so much. I'll drop off there.
All right, Vuyo, I'll give you the last word, and then I think go from there.
Yeah, I think it seems as if there's a concerted plan to make the country weaker in terms of its moral standing, especially in the fight against justice and what they've taken to the ICJ. So the claims against genocide, bad things happening in South Africa, and also questioning the funding sources of the ANC, I think they are part of that plan to make it, morally questionable as to the intentions of why they are doing it. I would perhaps be very happy if there would be some form of evidence that seeks to show that there was money channeled from Iran to the ANC. That way we are able to hold them accountable, because that is our duty as an opposition party. So Chris, Mark, if you can share such evidence, it would help us a great deal. And then the last issue, the issue of violence in our country affects all of us, and it is something that is troubling all of us. And we, from our side as a party, we're just sending a very clear message to say, once South Africa deals with the other socio-economic problems, we're going to see less crimes. Once South Africa is tough on criminality, we're going to see less crimes. And we hope that the government is going to act and ensure that this criminality problem that has been discussed even at the White House is going to inspire the police and the law enforcement in our country to really deal with it. Thank you.
Right, Mark, if you've got 30 seconds, you want to add something, and then we really cut it. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I think I share Vuyo's hope that meeting in the Oval Office leads to some substantive change in South Africa. I hope that we use the opportunity to restore our relationship with America. I think we should embrace non-racialism like we used to do in the 90s. We should chuck all the race-based laws. We should address the farm murder problem, and we should stop persecuting the only democracy in the Middle East. So, inshallah.
Let's thank you all very much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for watching us. Take care.